There's a kind of fire that doesn't burn with light or scream with heat. It burns in silence. It scorches from the inside. Zeno once compared the damage of poor choices to a burned hand, where the flesh is so far gone it no longer feels pain. That's the kind of fire we're talking about. Not the one that scorches instantly, but the one that takes its time, until your soul goes numb. Porn is that kind of fire. Quiet, predictable, unassuming. And yet beneath its surface it softens the steel in you until the blade dulls without a sound. Most men don't even realize they've been burned. They mistake numbness for control. They mistake arousal for power. But power isn't what you feel behind a screen. It's what you command when you walk into a room. And that command fades with every empty release. The Stoics taught that your greatest asset isn't your body, your image, or your appetites. It's your prohoresis, your inner choice, your sovereign will. Porn doesn't destroy that force all at once. It hijacks it quietly, rerouting your discipline into desire loops that give you nothing back. Marcus Aurelius said, "You become what your thoughts make habitual." What happens when those thoughts are tied not to courage, vision, or restraint, but to voyeurism, passivity, and indulgence? What happens is this: your moral muscle atrophies, your edge dulls, your attention, once sacred, scatters, not because you were weak, not because you were unwise, but because you were tired, and porn offered an exit that looked like relief. It's easy to say porn is chaos, but it's not. It's order misused. A loop so reliable, so predictable, that you start to feel safe in it. That safety is the sedative. It feels like comfort, but it's corrosion. And while your libido may still function, your clarity fades, your fire fades, your presence fades. Because the first casualty of this habit isn't sexual, it's psychological. The cost isn't in lust, it's in focus, vision, and masculine presence. This isn't a sermon, and it's not about shame. Shame changes nothing. What we're here to do is expose the theft, the slow erasure of the man you were becoming. This is about reclaiming the throne within your nervous system, your rituals, your quiet force. It's not a fight against porn, it's a return to clarity, to inner command, to a life where desire no longer drags you, but waits for your direction. This fire doesn't need to burn forever, but first, you have to see the smoke. You have to feel the silence. You have to admit, something has been leaving you, quietly, and it's time to come back. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the danger. It happens in moments too small to notice. A skipped task here, a lost morning there, and slowly, the man who once moved toward challenge starts to wait for comfort. Porn doesn't rewire the masculine mind with intensity. It does it with repetition. Each session teaches your brain something quiet, that satisfaction can be earned without effort, that pleasure requires no conquest, and that presence can be replaced by pixels. This is not harmless. This is not neutral. It is a long erosion of masculine fire disguised as release. Your brain is made to change. That's its genius. That's also its vulnerability. Neuroplasticity doesn't care what you feed it. Whether you train it for resilience or sedation, it will obey. With every hit of dopamine from artificial arousal, the masculine system learns a new rule. Wait, watch, don't act. And so action fades. Tension dissolves. Initiative withers. The problem isn't that porn gives you something. It's that it trains you to stop reaching for what you were born to pursue. It teaches conquest without effort, stimulation without movement, reward without initiation. A man's spirit is built to expand through pressure, through pursuit, through bold action and risk. Porn reverses that current. It teaches a man to sit and scroll, to expect reward without struggle. And over time, that reward loop becomes louder than his instincts. He stops leading not out of failure, but out of reprogramming. And no one sees it, not his colleagues, not his family, not even him, because the body still functions. He still works, still speaks, still gets through the day. But his internal compass, it's turned to static. What's lost isn't just drive, it's direction, orientation. That sense of what I must do becomes what I can delay. That urgency that once shaped his mornings turns into fog. And in that fog, leadership dies. Not with a scream, but with silence. Porn doesn't just sedate your body, it erases your map. It tells your nervous system, you've already won, but there's no battle, no effort, no woman, no warmth, just the glow of a screen and the slow dimming of your own command. Most men will never notice the scar because they don't see blood, but it's there. In the days that feel slower, in the thoughts that don't land, in the mirror that reflects a man with potential that he no longer feels. That scar, it's not on your body, it's on your will. And until you see it, it will keep getting deeper, quietly, faithfully, repeatedly, until there's nothing left to sedate, only something left to remember. It happens quietly, not with a loud failure or a dramatic breakdown, but with a shift in how a man sees. One day, his vision stops reaching forward. He no longer imagines, he no longer initiates. He waits, not for truth, not for direction, but for stimulation. And every time he chooses arousal over action, fantasy over focus, something sacred in him goes dormant. Masculine energy is made to move mountains, to build, to forge, but porn teaches a man to consume instead of create, to be satisfied watching a life he never built. What dies in this transaction is not just leadership, it's vision. Real masculine presence begins with sight, the ability to look into chaos and see order, to look into discomfort and see meaning. But porn removes the need for vision. It gives the reward without the reach. And when the brain learns to be gratified without striving, it starts to forget how to strive at all. He becomes reactive, not responsive. He responds to impulse, not intention. And in that shift, the initiator disappears. The builder fades. The leader sits still. This erosion is subtle. It doesn't look like weakness. It looks like delay. The man still speaks of goals, still plans, still posts. But the inner flame that used to drive him forward is flickering. And in its place is a hunger for the next spike, the next video, the next scroll, the next hit of false connection. Porn doesn't just offer pleasure. It offers escape from the responsibility of presence. And presence is where leadership begins. A man who cannot be fully present cannot lead. He can only follow impulses dressed as decisions. The damage reaches deeper, into fatherhood, into business, into stillness. Decision fatigue creeps in, clarity fogs, emotional hesitation replaces instinct. The man who once moved with purpose now second-guesses his own shadow. He no longer trusts his own silence, so he fills it with noise, with pleasure, with distraction. And all of it feels like rest, but none of it is restoration. Imagine a general studying maps day after day, never setting foot on the battlefield. That's the modern man fed by porn, surrounded by tools, but untouched by purpose. He looks prepared. He sounds intelligent, but he never marches. He never leads. He just waits and waits until vision becomes a memory instead of a compass, until movement feels foreign, until leadership becomes something he watches instead of something he embodies. At first, it feels like a cure, a fix, a way to quiet the ache that has no name. But what porn really feeds is not your desire, it's your distance. It offers a kind of closeness that demands nothing from you. No risk, no vulnerability, no presence, just pixels that pretend to connect while your nervous system forgets what real connection even feels like. The deeper you go into this loop, the more alone you become, even when you're constantly aroused, because arousal without intimacy is hunger without nourishment. Over time, you stop noticing how detached you've become, not from the world, but from yourself. Your body moves, your mind functions, but your emotional range narrows. You start feeling less, not just sexually, but spiritually. The same arms that once longed to hold are now trained only to take. The same heart that once beat with risk is now shielded by routines that avoid rejection. And in that avoidance, you begin to disappear, not from others, from yourself. The body becomes high, but the soul feels abandoned. This is the split. The dopamine spikes, but oxytocin, the hormone of bonding, never arrives. You feel the rush of sensation, but none of the warmth. And eventually, that lack of warmth becomes your new normal. You stop reaching, you stop risking. You start believing that no one would understand you anyway, and so you hide behind arousal, hoping it will distract you from the ache of not being truly seen. And here's the truth most men can't admit. They're not addicted to sex. They're starving for closeness, without having to be exposed. Porn gives them that illusion. It says, feel something without being known. But what it steals is the very thing that makes a man alive. His emotional clarity, his courage to sit in discomfort, his strength to say, this is what I need, and risk being denied. Each time you return to porn, you're not feeding your desire, you're avoiding your depth. And that avoidance costs you something sacred, the ability to be fully present with another person and with yourself. Over time, that cost becomes unbearable. Not because you're weak, but because no man was built to live emotionally bankrupt. You were not made to numb, you were made to feel, fully. And that truth, once remembered, will change everything. Porn gives you the illusion of power. You choose what to watch. You control when it begins. You decide when it ends. But none of it is real power. It's selection, not sovereignty. Domination without danger. Control without confrontation. The kind of control that requires nothing of you. Not your courage, not your presence, not your ability to be rejected and still remain whole. In that safety, masculinity withers, because real strength is forged in friction, and friction is exactly what porn removes. Masculinity isn't built by watching, it's built by becoming, by failing, by showing up when it's uncomfortable. Porn is appealing not because it gives you too much, but because it asks nothing from you. No vulnerability, no exposure, no fear, just comfort. And that comfort trains the man to remain unseen. It robs him of the sacred courage it takes to be witnessed as he is, not as a performer, not as a viewer, but as a human being with longing and limits. This dissonance creeps in slowly. In private, he feels strong. In public, he feels small. The confidence he's been rehearsing in isolation doesn't translate, because what porn strengthens is performance, not presence. It builds an inner world where everything is controlled, except the man himself. He becomes more addicted to the illusion than to the experience. And in that illusion, he starts mistaking artificial dominance for real integrity. Zeno once spoke of the broken vessel, appearing whole, but leaking from within. That's the man shaped by porn. He looks fine, functions well, but inside, his confidence bleeds quietly. Not because he lacks value, but because he no longer confronts the edge where that value is tested. And without that testing, strength becomes theory, discipline becomes concept, self-respect becomes a memory. There comes a point when you have to face it. You're not leading your life, you're scrolling it. You're not becoming the man you imagined. You're consuming the fantasy of his life. And every time you choose to watch instead of build, to retreat instead of rise, you reinforce the illusion. Control without chaos is not strength, it's stagnation. And if you're not careful, you'll spend years mistaking stillness for power, when it was just fear, in disguise. You don't notice it at first, just a slight discomfort when the room is too quiet, a subtle restlessness when the moment doesn't give you something instantly. Then one day, boredom feels unbearable, stillness feels like punishment, and the tasks that once shaped your focus now feel impossible to begin. That's the cost of dopamine addiction. Not chaos, not collapse, but a soft decay of discipline. Porn floods the nervous system with high reward, low effort gratification. Over time, the body forgets how to suffer well. And suffering, quiet, consistent, chosen suffering, is the foundation of masculine peace. Stoic discipline isn't about punishment, it's about preparation. It teaches the body to endure discomfort with grace, to find stillness in struggle, to breathe in pain without panic. But when pleasure becomes the default, pain becomes intolerable. The man who once trained his instincts to hold pressure now flinches at the slightest weight. He no longer stretches toward challenge, he shrinks from it. Not because he lost strength, but because he surrendered his threshold. Dopamine made it feel like growth, but it was sedation all along. Pleasure isn't the enemy, but unearned pleasure is. And porn is the most accessible version of that lie. A quick hit that feels like reward, but teaches nothing, builds nothing, strengthens nothing. Every time you choose it over discipline, you rewrite the contract between your will and your body, and eventually, your body stops listening. Focus feels unnatural, rest feels impossible, stillness becomes loud. The man begins to feel like a stranger to himself, not because he changed suddenly, but because he never noticed what was slowly being untrained. There's a kind of spiritual immunity that comes from restraint, from saying no when the body begs for yes, from sitting with tension instead of escaping it, from letting pain carve out space for depth. Porn reverses that alchemy. It makes the body a traitor to the soul. It trains your system to chase sparks instead of enduring the slow fire that forges real power. It makes you allergic to the very discomfort that would have set you free. And here's the truth no one tells you. Self-command doesn't start in the mind. It begins in the body, in the silence between urges, in the choice to stay with the unease. in the decision to hold your line when everything in you wants to abandon it. Porn severs that line, not loudly, but daily. And the longer it severs, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before your pain tolerance disappeared, before your strength was measured by what you didn't chase, before your peace had to be earned, not streamed. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. You feel them in the moments when no one is watching, in the silence after a failure, in the loneliness that lingers, even when the room is full. And many men, without knowing it, carry a wound that began long before they ever opened a browser. A father wound, not always from abuse, often from absence, from emotional coldness, from a silence that never taught them how to sit with themselves. And in that emotional gap, many boys grew into men who never learned how to self-regulate. They learned how to distract, how to dissociate, how to disappear when things felt too heavy. Porn becomes that escape, a relief valve for emotions that were never allowed to exist in daylight. It gives immediate release but delays the work of grief, the work of patience, the work of choosing honesty over hiding. So instead of facing the discomfort, the boy inside reaches for relief, not because he's shameful, but because he was never shown another way. And the cycle continues. Sexuality becomes performance, not presence. Intimacy becomes a trigger, not a sanctuary. The mirror reflects a man, but behind the eyes, still a boy who never had permission to feel. This is where porn becomes more than a habit. It becomes a surrogate for the embrace he never received, for the words he never heard, for the emotional rituals he was never taught. And instead of confronting that grief, he masks it with pleasure. But pleasure without vulnerability is a trap. It feels like power, but it's just protection from a pain that deserves reverence, not avoidance. Men start to pretend. They pretend they are lions in private, but in truth they are boys in the dark, fighting ghosts with their bare hands. They roar into silence, hoping it will echo back some kind of answer. But the silence doesn't lie. It reveals. It shows the emotional immaturity not as weakness, but as something still unfinished. And nothing stays unfinished forever without consequence. Eventually, the illusion breaks, the mirror cracks, and the man is forced to look, not at the habit, but at the pain beneath it, at the story that never got told, at the father he still carries inside his nervous system. That confrontation is terrifying, but it is also sacred, because it marks the moment he stops running and starts remembering, not just who he is, but what he needed, what he still needs, and what only discipline, stillness, and emotional truth can ever begin to restore. Some of the strongest men you'll ever meet won't say a word about what they gave up. They won't post about it. They won't preach it. They won't turn it into a banner. But you'll feel it when they enter a room. You'll see it in how they move. Deliberate, grounded, unshaken. They carry a silence that doesn't beg for attention because they've done the work, quietly, without applause. They didn't stop watching porn to be better than anyone. They stopped because something in them grew tired of living fragmented. They stopped because they wanted their mind back, their clarity back, their time. These men reclaim their fire one decision at a time. Not through grand declarations, but through subtle defiance. They walk away from the screen like it no longer owns them. They stop chasing highs that never healed them. And something changes. Their focus sharpens. Their days stretch longer. Their work deepens. Their gaze becomes still. They listen more. They react less. And they don't brag about it. Because real transformation doesn't scream. It speaks through presence. There's a nobility in this kind of discipline. A return to self-respect so quiet it's almost invisible. But it's there, in how he answers a question without rushing, in how he holds discomfort without flinching, in how he no longer looks for something to take the edge off. Because the edge is his now, and he's learned how to carry it. Porn doesn't just take away your energy. It robs you of something few can name, your invisible nobility, that inner stature you once had before you knew what it meant to escape. And that stature can't be recovered through external success. It returns only through quiet decisions, through choosing presence over passivity, through the kind of self-command that leaves no residue, only a quiet strength others can feel. No one will clap for you when you stop. There's no ceremony, no badge, but that's not why you do it. You do it because it's time. Because the man you're becoming can't live in the same body as the man you were while hiding. And when that shift happens, you don't need to prove anything. You just live differently. You just lead differently. You just become the kind of man who doesn't need relief, because he finally reclaimed his rhythm. There's a place inside every man that cannot be bought, seduced, or invaded. The Stoics called it the citadel, not a wall around your heart, but a fortress within your will. Zeno believed that the true strength of a man was not in how he performed for the world, but in how ungoverned he remained by it. Porn doesn't destroy that fortress through force. It seeps in through routine. It doesn't knock down your gates. It convinces you to open them one moment at a time, until you no longer recognize the silence inside as your own. And that's the real invasion. Not the lust, not the pleasure, but the slow retreat from your own command post. The point where you stopped protecting your energy, where you started trading your vision for ease, where the mind that once stayed sharp began to blur. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That mastery doesn't come through obsession. It comes through remembering who you were before the fog, before the noise, before you started giving your power to images that gave nothing back. To end this cycle is not a declaration of purity. It is a quiet return to clarity, to order, to presence, not to be better, but to be whole. Because focus is not just a mental skill, it is a sacred masculine discipline. It is the thread that connects your actions to your purpose, your breath to your patience, your silence to your strength. And porn doesn't just break that thread, it teaches you to stop needing it, until your mind feels scattered, your instincts feel foreign, and your fire feels borrowed. But that fire never left. It was buried under habits that numbed it, covered by rituals that softened it, and now, slowly, it begins to rise again, not in rage, not in shame, but in silence. You don't need to tell the world you've changed. The world will feel it, in your eyes, in your presence, in the stillness you now carry without apology. This isn't abstinence, it's resurrection, a return to the throne within your nervous system, a remembering of the man who was never meant to chase false pleasure, but to hold real power, in stillness, in silence, in sovereign focus. Welcome back.